Towards Understanding with Clayton Bielen values being a positive radio program for everyone. As we present today's episode, please accept this little ears warning. Some of the themes discussed may not be suitable for children.
Sometimes in life, we set our values and then we say they are never to change. And I actually think there's really good wisdom in that, to a point. Sometimes it's absolutely appropriate to really think through that and say, well, this is the thing I'm not moving from. We talk about that with our kids, don't we? Hey, what's the value of integrity? Or what's the value of honesty? Or whatever it might be. Well, today, Ian is going to be sharing a story with us, and I want you to especially hear the understanding that he went through of going through context and culture and realizing some parts of values which will not change. And sometimes you might need to change because of context and culture. And how do you go through that process? It's just part of his incredible story. He and his wife, Heather, spent a number of years in Samoa, and they immersed themselves in that culture. And it changed them. Even now, decades later, we're going to hear that story as he's put out a book about his experiences. Just before we get to Ian, please do rate, review, like the podcast, share it with friends. Helps us get it out to more and more people. All right, let's have a chat with Ian. Ian, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's really, really good to have you in. Let's just get the sort of 30-second, 40-second summary of what the book is about, which part of your life captured, and then we're going to deep dive into more of the story.
So my wife Heather and I were in our late 20s, and we volunteered to serve as teachers in Samoa. We'd never been overseas before. It was a bit of a shock arriving in a developing country, one of the poorest countries in the Pacific, and then 2 weeks later a cyclone came and destroyed everything. It left us without power and water and running out of food in a foreign country and not knowing what to do. And then the rest of the story takes over around recovery from the cyclone, engagement with the culture, and the challenge of trying to live and work in a radically different culture to what we had been used to in Australia, and then eventually engaging in the lives of our students.
Let's go back to that start of the story. The call to say, all right, well, we're going to go and do this. You said you're in your 20s. I'm assuming recently-ish married, and so here you are making this big leap. I'd imagine there'd be a whole lot of preparation that you'd decide. What was the decision, firstly, to say, well, actually, this is something we're going to do, and how long were you planning on going over there to teach?
Yeah. So I was quite interested in appropriate technology for developing countries. I'm an engineer by training, and I was working as an engineer at that stage for the Defence Force. My wife, Heather, was teaching English as a second language to a lot of migrant kids from Cambodia and Vietnam, refugees. And we were interested and wondered whether God, was leading us to go on mission. So we did a lot of training with what was then the Evangelical Alliance, mainly with Tear Fund, World Vision, Wycliffe Bible Translators, and a few other organisations like that. And then a friend at World Vision named John Stewart advised us that to get some experience, the Australian Volunteers Abroad program was a good one. So they basically act as an employment brokers. We applied towards the end of mid-1989. So we'd been married just over 2.5 years and were accepted. And then we did a 1-week training course in Melbourne. And the next day they put us on the plane and waved goodbye.
Wow. So here you are, you're going over, you're expecting to be there and to teach maybe English, whatever it might be, and, slowly get involved with the culture. As you said, there's a big culture shock anyway for you at the start, but then to have this cyclone come and change everything on its head. Take me through what it was like to go from, okay, well, suddenly there was a culture shock anyway, and then now everybody is in a state of trying to recover from a natural disaster.
Yeah. So I think the initial shock was developing country. Sure, we'd read about it. We didn't realise what it really meant. Things don't work. The climate was oppressively hot. It rained torrentially 3 times a day. So we were just adjusting to that. We'd got into our home that the school gave us, And the conditions that we went there were to live and work on a local salary and local conditions. So we lived in a house just like other Samoan teachers. We were settling in a bit. We knew how to go and shop and buy food. And we were expecting school to start the day the cyclone came.
Wow.
So we were, it was a surprise to realise what we were in. We also didn't have any understanding of how bad it might be. It wasn't as bad as Cyclone Tracy, but it was pretty bad anyway. And going through that, we really, felt our way moment by moment. The most difficult thing after the first night wasn't being scared or frightened. It was the monotony of being constantly wet.
Mm-hmm.
So rain blew horizontally through our house, through the open windows, which we couldn't close, and out the other side, and fell down through the roof. Everything was wet, including our bedding and our clothes. But we sheltered with some other friends nearby. They were American Peace Corps volunteers. Two of them were two Christian girls. They were very encouraging. They taught us things. And what it did was within a short time we found ourselves cooking outside, washing in the village bathing pool, and carrying our water from a spring, which is pretty much how a lot of Samoans lived.
Yeah.
So within 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, we were living like Samoans. We were living on boiled rice and tinned fish, and with a few vegetables, which is what they were eating as well. So it gave us a crash course in cultural adaptation. It was a harsh course, I got to admit, but we learned very rapidly not only how to live, but how other people lived.
Yeah.
And it became something that we shared with the Samoan people. So we were newly arrived, we were very green, we were naive, but within that space of time, when we went to visit families, weeks later and spend time with them, they had a respect for us because we'd been there with them and we'd shared that experience. We had a shared experience with them. And that really helped us identify with them and them to, recognise, I think, that we, with a shared experience, understood them in ways that a tourist or someone else just arriving did not.
Yeah. How long was it then until you actually did get to do some teaching?
We started teaching about 3 weeks after the cyclone. We had no water at the school, but the principal and the teachers were very keen to get started because the kids were just losing weeks of education.
Yeah.
We were teaching year 11 and 12, so particularly for the year 12 students, this was quite critical.
Mm.
So we wanted to get started. So we got going with 800 students in the tropics. These are teenagers from age 15 to 18, without any water at the school.
Wow. Wow.
So we ran part-time for a few hours a day, and then once we had one tap at the school and had water, then we went full-time. About 6 weeks later.
Yeah. So, how long was it until you went? Okay, not like quite. This is my home, but this is where I'm starting to feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. Right. This is as settled as I can be in that sense.
Yeah. There's a moment I describe in the book, which is actually just after the cyclone, when everyone was struggling. A lot of people we were with felt quite depressed about the situation. There were others who had arrived or been there earlier, and one of our co-workers just disappeared one day, just vanished. He was a New Zealand teacher, and he just went to the airport, got a ticket and flew home.
Mm.
So a lot of people were wondering, particularly family back in Australia and others were wondering, are you going to stay? And when I describe this in the book, there was a point where we had to ask the question, are we going to stay? And in our minds, it was not a question that we were really entertaining. We felt like, well, we're here. God has put us here. This is why we're here. Why would we go?
Yeah.
So I think at that point, you never feel really, I don't think, in a foreign culture, that it's home until you can joke and laugh and become part of the culture itself.
Yes.
You always feel like you're a bit of an outsider, and part of that is the constant uncertainty of not knowing what's happening.
Yes.
So it really took us probably 6 months before we felt like that we had fitted in. We had our place in the culture. They had slotted us in to where we belonged. We sort of understood that. But in terms of commitment to stay and to make this our home, that was very early on.
Yeah.
We made that decision, and we never looked back.
When you first, sort of before you even got to Samoa, how long were you planning on being there? What was the sort of the intent?
So it was a 2-year posting
Yep.
with the option that we could extend if we wanted to. So we thought 2 years was a short time,
Yes.
and I still think it was a short time.
Yes.
But I notice now people see 2 years as a long-term
Yeah, right.
commitment
Yeah.
to overseas service.
Yeah.
It's not very long.
Yeah,
You learn a lot, but you don't really know very much
Yeah.
at the end of 2 years.
Often, I mean, you need to go through a year cycle to even just understand what happens in a year,
Exactly.
right? Let alone,
Yeah.
now this is happening again. Oh, this is maybe what the cycle is. So 2 years was the
Yeah.
intent. What was the actual end amount of time that you did spend?
We stayed the 2
The
years.
2 4 years. Yeah.
We got asked by our principal to stay longer.
Yeah.
He was very keen to have us stay.
Yeah.
Heather was very keen. She was very interested in staying longer. We did think about it carefully.
Yeah.
But we've also felt that, I wanted to go to Europe. I wanted to go to Labrie, which was the work started by the Schaeffers, basically to be able to debrief and also understand the roots of our own culture. Because every cultural encounter, if you engage really at a depth that matters, it raises questions within your own mind about who am I and what's my identity and why am I here and where am I going with my life?
Yes.
And why does it matter, or why do I matter? Why am I important?
Yes.
And I don't raise the question in the book, but it will be in the next book, which is, if I'm the youngest daughter in the poorest family in a poor village in a country no one's heard of, why am I significant?
Yeah.
So I was asking those questions and I was seeking answers within myself, and we did answer those to a point. But I wanted to be able to look at what my own culture told me about those things.
Yeah. How did being there help raise those questions? Like, why was it raising? Because you were seeing, poverty in different ways, because those were being asked in different senses. Like, what was it that said these were the questions that were being raised in you?
I think because every culture has a different set of answers.
Yeah, okay.
And the Samoans were Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but they still had a different way of looking at the world and a different way of, I guess, understanding their significance within their world.
Yeah.
And so when you looked at their answers, and because they were at least nominally Christian, they still had different answers to what I would bring as a Westerner to those questions.
Yeah.
And I, if I talk with missionaries, a lot of our friends went with Wycliffe or pioneers or others, they all say the same thing when you engage in that. And we were there to, I write about incarnation because that was a theological sort of concept in the 80s, that mission should be about incarnation and becoming the culture that you go to serve and live amongst, with Jesus as being the ultimate example of incarnation. So we couldn't do that in 2 years. We probably never can. But we did try to become Samoan as much as we could. And in doing that, you have to think like a person in the culture that you're going to. It changes your thinking and it changes your values.
Yeah.
So you start to make value judgments that your own culture says are wrong.
Yeah.
And that's quite disturbing, and disturbing for people back home when they...
Can you give an example of one of those?
I mean, one of them was, probably a classic example would be corporal punishment in schools.
Yeah.
They beat kids pretty badly, And there was an extreme version of that, which we thought was terrible. And we came along thinking, we're not going to do that. We don't think that's right. But ultimately, the kids were expecting it. And corporal punishment is delivered very quickly, very swiftly, and then it's all over. And you sort of start with a clean sheet. You've taken your punishment. Here we engage in psychological games with kids to try and, persuade them and control them in class. And the kids actually said to us, if you really loved us, you would hit us like our Samoan teachers. They really love us, but you don't, because you won't do that. You don't care enough.
Wow.
Which sort of turned that on its head for us. And we had to find ways, okay, I'm not going to beat these kids with a rubber hose.
Yes,
But we did send them out to weed this weed that grew prolifically called Valfefe, and it's a thorn. So when you pull it out, it
hurts.
It hurts.
Yeah.
You end up with bleeding fingers,
Yes.
and not only that, you're out in the sun in the tropics.
Yes.
And if worse comes to worse, the principal will come by and see that you're being punished and think that the white teacher's too soft, so into the office and give him a beating anyway.
Yes, right.
But that was too much for a lot of our friends when we came back, that you would inflict physical harm on a child.
Yeah.
Well, they inflicted it on themselves, so it was partly their problem.
Yeah.
But that was our compromise.
Yeah. But a beautiful analogy of having to think differently, having to understand different values, and be in that environment. That is quite remarkable. My guest is Ian Reilly. His book is Encounter, a Journey into Chaos, Culture and Compassion. And even I think in, just even that story, we heard a bit of all of that chaos, compassion and that culture as well needing to be understood. We're going to be back with Ian in a couple of minutes' time. I want to talk to him about things around what's his perspective around aid, poverty, development, having lived in a situation in a developing country, his take on that. And as he reflects on this story, a number of decades later, what is some of the key things that he does take away from this as well? That's on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
You mentioned a couple of times, if you just joined us, this is the second part of our conversation, Ian, and you chatted earlier on about, you talked a bit about faith, and you have a strong Christian belief in Jesus too. Talk to us about, why that was a part of you going and teach in a school. You weren't going to be a missionary that many might see as, going to talk about Jesus specifically. It was, I'm assuming, part of what you did. But why was that faith aspect something that drove you and Heather to actually go and do this work?
Yeah. So we were, to be honest, we were keen to travel and experience another culture. But we are Christians, and we felt that we should do that in a way where we can serve. I was interested, as I mentioned, in appropriate technology, and I thought as an engineer, perhaps God is wanting me to use my engineering skills in this way to help people who are poorer people within the world. And so that was why we had training from World Vision and Tier Fund. We essentially went as tent makers. So there's the concept of tent making, which is what Paul did, where he went and lived and worked, but then along the way he shared the gospel.
And it's called tent making, if you're unfamiliar, because he was literally a tent maker. That was his job, and so that's the vernacular now.
That's right. So we actually did some training with an organisation called ASTEM, which was just starting, and it was actually training people in order to do that, so that you could go and serve and work, but then share the gospel along the way. So I think the initial thing for us was, the initial shock was something that we were praying about, obviously, and getting over. And I think God helped us enormously by giving us 2 American Peace Corps volunteers next door who were both committed Christians. And that was really encouraging and helpful. Then during the cyclone, of course, we were praying on the first night, keep us safe, Lord, what will happen? But we're also expecting, well, if things do go bad, things that we might do in response. But as I mentioned earlier on, when we look back on that cyclone experience, it was as if God had given us this gift of first, training in culture, how to live like a Samoan, but also identification with Samoan people that we'd come to serve. So it became something that we felt was an answer to prayer that we had not expected, and a prayer answered in a way that we never would have thought would be the thing to do. Yeah. But God has a way of answering our prayers in ways that we don't expect. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that the case so often that it comes in? You wouldn't have thought I'd say the cyclone that's going to give us all of those things, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
The byline is the chaos, culture, and compassion, and in almost every story you've shared with us so far, that they've constantly been intertwined, right? As you've talked about that, what has occurred. Could I ask your perspective too around, this is a developing country, the cyclone hit, you're there to serve. Your perspectives around aid, development, around poverty in our world, and I suppose a faith perspective, especially for those there's those listening at the moment in New Zealand and Australia, listening to our conversation, who aren't in those same situations. What is it the best perspective and the best way our responses should be in the privileged situation that we're sitting in?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. I think if you're here and you wanted to serve, people who may be struggling with endemic poverty, which can be quite bad, I think the most important thing is to, one, identify with the people, so go there and be with the people, and two, don't have any expectations or assumptions about how you're going to help, because the world is a complex place, and the needs that you think these people have may not be their real needs. And in order to find out what their real needs are and how you can help, you actually need to go there, identify with there, live there with them, and live their own experience. It changed our view of poverty in some ways, in that I talk about this in the final two chapters of the book, where we stay with one of the poorest families in Samoa by international standards. They lived in a traditional house with woven mats on the floor and a thatched roof in a backwood village that was fairly poor. And they had no running water. On the face of it, this seems very poor. Their income was probably a few $100 a year. But they lived relatively well, in the sense that they all had land to farm. They all had plenty of food that they could grow of their own. It was good, healthy, nutritious food. They had fresh water. They didn't need any water system to do that. They had a village bathing pool filled with fresh water every day, natural from a natural spring. They were a lot better off than what we thought, what you would think of as people who are poor. So that challenged our ideas of thinking about poverty. What is poverty? Because they would look at us and say, well, we have a poverty of community, because their community was very strong, the culture was very strong. They had this cultural strength of looking after each other and sharing their food and sharing belongings. So if someone got a fridge in the village, for example, they wouldn't have one because they didn't have power at the time. But they eventually got one, they got power, and then they have a fridge. Well, it ends up being shared with 4 or 5 other families. So they had this that we didn't have in our own culture, that same strength. We might have 100 years ago, but it's been lost. And they had a clear story about where they'd come from in their history, with their understanding of the Bible and and God in their lives and their Christian faith, and that was very strong and it was very important to them. And so that bound them together. That was very valuable. So I asked the question, what is the value of those things?
Yes.
It's not something you can put in monetary terms, but it does translate into quality of life, health, happiness, contentment, and a whole lot of other things that we hold dear. So I'm not saying that all poor people aren't really poor. I'm saying that your idea of poverty may be very wrong, and it probably is. And to find out, you need to go there. You need to live with those people, identify with them, live like them, and understand them before you start helping them.
I can't remember where, but recently I heard the phrase, compassion can only come with proximity.
Yes.
I think it might have been Tyler Stanton who actually said that you must be close. Like we see Jesus in the Gospels, like that's what it was. Like compassion comes with proximity. You are close to people to understand.
Yes.
If it's from a fair way away, it might just be a bit of sympathy or something like that. But compassion actually comes with that proximity. I quite like that phrase.
So pity is something that you express at a distance.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
And Tim Costello says he's got a little book called, I think, The Cost of Compassion or something like that.
Yes.
But one of the things I talk about in there is that cost, that compassion always comes with a price tag that you must give. Yeah. It hurts.
Yep. But then there's something that comes back, isn't there? But
yes.
It's in a different form, as we mentioned too, this program's throughout Australia and New Zealand, and I think Australians especially perhaps think about an island like Samoa or Pacific Islands as almost holiday destinations. I think New Zealanders have a slightly different perspective and a different cultural understanding that it's not just a holiday destination. How would you encourage those who are listening right now to be thinking about our Pacific Island nations nearby us? What is the best way to actually view them and their part in our world, as it were?
Yeah, I think Pacific Island nations today are growing in wealth. There's a lot of money. Most of that money comes from remittances from people overseas. So about 3 times as many Samoans live outside Samoa as in.
Wow.
And now there are multiple second and third generations of Pacific Islanders in Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and some other places. So I think understanding that they have a very strong culture, but the culture is changing. It is changing in ways that, my hope and prayer is that they have some control over that. And I think helping them to be able to be masters of their destiny and not be swamped by stuff from overseas, a lot of which is not helpful. Yeah. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't develop, though. Yeah. There's often a criticism that, it's almost like people are much more content being undeveloped than developed. But quite honestly, if you had the opportunity to get a refrigerator and you live in the tropics, where honestly it is stinking hot all year round, and be able to offer you and your neighbours ice water.
Yes, that's right.
You shouldn't deprive them of that.
Yeah.
But that means you need electricity and you need this and you need that and you need all these other things in order to make that happen.
Yes.
So I think one of the important thing to do is let those Samoans or the Tongans or the Fijians, let them decide what is good for their country and their people. Yeah. Not have something imposed from outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you look back at, this experience was a number of decades ago now. People, I'm sure, would be wondering, have you been back since then as
yes,
well?
Yeah, a couple of times.
A couple of times, excellent.
Yeah.
It would be, what sort of experiences that happen when you come back, knowing some of the culture, but obviously now having a gap as well. How quickly do you slip back into the culture?
I think we slipped in pretty quickly. Yeah. I remember we arrived on an overnight flight the first time with our 2 teenage kids, and we went to the hotel, deposited our bags, and then walked down towards the market, and immediately ran into someone we knew. Slipping back it's nice. It's sort of easy, I think, for us to slip back, except that we get tripped up by the changes.
Yeah.
Some things don't work the way they used to. Some things are a lot more European now, and that sort of catches us out a bit. It's good to go back to the villages and spend time there because there's a lot less change in those villages. Yeah. In some cases, our heart aches a little bit for the changes. They have a litter problem now. There was almost no litter whatsoever when we were there. Everything, including, wrappers for lollies or sweets and things, they would reuse everything. Every tin can was reused and remade into something else. Yeah. Today, there's a litter problem. Yeah, right. Yeah. And that means pollution of the coastline.
Yes,
and,
of course, yeah.
Plastic bottles and all of those things that go with it. There's also a lot of tourism now, and to our mind, it sort of spoils things a bit.
Yes, yeah, that understood too.
Yeah, and people, when we were there, we would go to a village where children might have only seen a white person for the first time.
Yes,
and that's kind of sweet in a way.
Yes,
the curiosity and the staring,
yes,
which can be a little unsettling. But now everyone knows, and the parlangis everywhere, so that's a bit spoiled.
Final question from me as you sort of reflect back, and I've been just so taken by the layer on layer of depth of thought as you've talked about. Well, what are the values that have reshaped me as I've looked back at this, or what are the cultural understandings? As you sort of look back at that experience, the things that there's something that we haven't talked about that you go, well, this is still shaping me because of that. And I suppose especially, what do you want us as the listener, as the reader of the book, to walk away with as our takeaway? The show's called Towards Understanding. What do we head towards a better understanding of? What's the thing you want us to do?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things there. One of the purposes of the book is to give people a vicarious experience, to feel like what it's like to be someone who goes to another country and tries to settle into another culture, and what are the challenges that you take away from that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that because, as I said, cultural encounter like that raises questions around who am I, where am I going, why am I here? Throughout the book, I try to give Christian answers to those questions, and I use the words of Jesus quoted at the front of every chapter.
Yes.
And then I reflect back on that. So I'm not preaching. I'm just saying this is how a Christian would view these situations. This is how we viewed it. These are our struggles, Yeah. Sometimes we didn't know what was going on and we were very confused and wondered what God had for us. But I try to give a Christian answers to some of those big questions of life. Yeah. Where am I going? Why am I here? Why am I significant and important? Why do I matter? What's wrong and what's right, and why is that so? Yeah. And who am I? What is my identity really? Yeah. And I hope that people use that to have conversations about those questions coming out of the book. So ultimately, I hope it's a conversation starter.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Ian, it's been great having a chat to you. Thank you so much for writing the book and coming in and having a chat with us today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Ian Reilly has been my guest. He's the author of the book Encounter, A Journey into Chaos, Culture and Compassion, here on Towards Understanding.